So you're looking to invest in property, but you're not sure which areas to invest in. This video is made perfect for you. In this very video, I detail 21 locations to avoid like the plague. So watch this video all the way through to the very end to understand why I'm not investing in these locations, but also so you don't make mistakes and trip up and start your property investing journey on the back foot. Oh, and I nearly forgot. I think the last area in particular is going to shock you. My name is Marco. I'm a portfolio landlord, property investor, developer, and mentor, and I love helping people invest in residential property. Now, before we get into this video, some very brief positive news to share. One of my mentees, Simon and Cal, they've just got an incredible purchase agreed. That's a £45,000 discount to the market value of a buy-to-let purchase. So well done, Simon and Cal. Right, well, let's come on to areas that we should avoid. Every year I like to do this type of video. I've been doing it for the last 2 to 3 years, and it's well received. And in this particular video, we've got some new locations to share. Before I go into those locations, let's just understand a few basics. So I want to talk very briefly about capital growth and rental yield and how they are inversely correlated. So capital growth is the growth in the property prices over time, and rental yield is the annual rent over the price of that particular property. And as I said, they're inversely correlated. So when we're looking in areas that have high capital growth potential, normally the yield is low, and vice versa. If we're looking in areas where the rental yield is high, typically we can expect lower capital growth. But it's our job as investors to try and, if we can, score high on both fronts. And there will be some deals where we can score high on both fronts, but they're very difficult to find. And for those that do work with me, we find these types of deals on a regular basis. Now, what determines capital growth? Well, quite a lot of things determine capital growth, but there are some key fundamentals that also play a large factor too. Things such as the percentage of owner-occupiers in those areas, the employers in those areas and the employment rate, the schools, transport links, and crime. These things are really important. So if an area scores fairly well for all those 5, it's probably going to be a good area where yields are quite low. Conversely, if the area scores poor on all those 5 fronts, it's probably not going to be the best area. Yes, you may get a great rental yield, but your capital growth forecast may not be too great in the short to medium term. The last point I want to make in regards to capital growth and rental yield is capital growth typically pays you more than rental yield, but you have to wait to realize that, okay? So it can take several years, unless you're buying at a discount, in which case there's creative ways of pocketing some of that difference straight away. Whereas rental yield, you get paid more in the short term, but less in the long term. And there's no right or wrong. It's what's right for you. So if you're looking for an income now, you could actually say rental yield is more important to me. But if you're willing to forego that income for a larger growth, then maybe capital growth could be better suited for you. Okay, so let's get into the areas now. I'm just going to reel to my laptop where I've made some notes. And I've grouped these areas into 5 different types. So we've got 21 locations in 5 different types, and it'll make more sense as the video progresses. So first of all, I've grouped the first category in the cheapest properties to purchase in the UK / the areas that I believe have poor capital growth outlook going forward. Areas such as Hartlepool, Bishop Auckland, Peterlee, Accrington, Blackburn, Nelson and Colne. Now, these towns and cities that I've just reeled off, a lot of them are up north, and as I've previously alluded to, it's very cheap to buy properties in this particular area. And some people actually do buy properties in these areas because they think, oh, they're so cheap, I'm going to go for it, I'm going to buy it, great. But let's just think about that for a second. If we look at the fundamentals on average in these particular areas, they score quite low. So actually, over time, we're not going to see such a great increase in those property prices compared to other desirable locations, which I'll mention in the next video that follows this. So listen, I understand budget constraints. If we're limited on budget and we have to look in these areas, then so be it. But my philosophy is, buy in the best areas you can afford. So actually, if you can afford to buy in and invest in better areas than the towns and cities I've just named, then do it. Don't just go there because they're the cheapest. And another couple of things to say in this particular area is think about the mortgageability. So it's sometimes when you're buying in these areas, it's hard to get a mortgage on a property because the purchase price is so low. Lenders are not willing to lend, and you only have specialist lenders coming in to fill that gap, and they charge quite high rates. So if you are buying with a mortgage, we need to be sure that the property in question we can get a mortgage on, which then leads me to return on capital employed, which is a measure how some investors, including myself, measure success. This calculation basically measures the cash we have in the deal compared to the profit we're making from the particular deal. And when we look at this calculation, actually buying in these types of areas, and certainly with cash, produces a somewhat lower return on capital. So it ties in very nicely you to the prior point, if we're buying in these areas, let's make sure we're buying with a mortgage if that is your particular strategy and you're looking to evaluate your deals based on return on capital employed. Now, if you are enjoying this video, please do me a huge favour. It doesn't take any of your time. Click that thumbs up, like button on the video. You'll still see me talk in real life. It won't pause the video, and this will promote the video to other people. And also, one more favour whilst you're still at it, if you wouldn't mind hitting that subscribe button again, that's going to mean the world to me. So thank you very much. So number two, the second areas to avoid, and we're going to get extremely narrow and extremely niche now because I know this area absolutely inside and out. So I live in Leeds. I invest largely in Leeds, but although Leeds is an incredible place to invest, there are some no-go areas. There are some places I definitely don't want to go, and I don't want to be buying houses or property there whatsoever. So what are those areas? Well, I looked at my computer. So first of all, Hare Hills, not the best area to be. East End Park, Belle Isle. And I've got one more, probably not as bad as the three that I've just mentioned, and it's a bit more general, but Bradford in general. Now, there are some okay areas in Bradford to invest in, but there are a lot of places definitely to avoid. And when you compare Bradford with the BD postcode to Leeds with the LS postcode, that LS postcode appreciates in value over time on average so much more than the BD postcodes do. And when we look back to the 2007-2008 financial crash, oh my gosh, those BD postcodes got absolutely obliterated. So, you know, I really do feel for it, investors who had property in Bradford prior to the crash. In fact, I remember an investor came into my office nearly 10 years ago with a list of 20 properties in Bradford he purchased prior to the recession. And, you know, this was probably 2016 around that time, and they still hadn't recovered price-wise. So those are the areas to avoid if you're looking to invest in Leeds and the surrounding areas. Now, if you are looking to get access to incredible below market value deals for absolutely free and to get first priority access, then please do sign up to our mailing list. The link is in the description. I'll also put the link on the screen here too. And because I operate in Leeds, I'd say a large number of the deals are from and around Leeds that are on that list, but we do get national deals come to us occasionally too. Moving on to the third type of areas and locations that I am avoiding, and these are run-down coastal cities and towns. You know, they've had their day. Places such as Blackpool, Hastings, Morecambe, Barrow-in-Furness. You know, these places were once great 50 years ago prior to the emergence of cheap package holidays abroad, but they've definitely had their day. So in these particular areas, you can get very high-yielding properties, but the capital growth prospect looks fairly poor, if I'm brutally honest. So these are areas that I would not invest in personally. And here's the thing, if you're doing a serviced accommodation type strategy, I'd probably still avoid these areas too. Although they're on the coast and probably on a sunny day they can be somewhat enjoyable, I think most of the year you may struggle to fill them at a reasonable rate. So for these reasons that I've mentioned, I'm out to those particular locations. On to the fourth type of area, and that is the Welsh valleys in general. I'm being very general here. Now here's why I would avoid this particular area. Capital growth prospect again is fairly slim, simply because it's so remote, it's so somewhat isolated. The fundamentals, I mean, there are few employers in that area. Not many people want to live there, even though it can be a beautiful place to live. Not many people want to live there. So demand is low. And in any market where demand is low, it's always a telltale sign to perhaps get out unless supply is ultra restricted. Now, if you're a local investor, you know, if you're in the valleys yourself, it may work for you. You may have that knowledge advantage. And that goes without saying for all the locations I've mentioned. If you're local to those areas, you probably have the advantage where investors and out-of-towners don't, and perhaps use that to your advantage, and that is your edge. But for someone living outside the Welsh valleys to invest in there for a high yield, I'm not really buying it. I think that's too much of a short-term view in my opinion. Now let's come on to the final and the fifth property type location that I'm avoiding like the plague, and that is very, very good, large, fundamentally positive cities and locations and towns, but ones that have a poor yield, such as London, Luton, Watford, St Albans, Guildford. Now these areas are absolutely lovely areas, or at least some of them are lovely areas, and I've got no doubt that people want to live there, and the fundamentals are largely positive, and the capital growth prospects as a result can be largely positive, perhaps with the exception of London. But the huge issue we have here is the yield is too low to make it viable, I'd say, for most investors. So, you know, most investors, even most capital growth investors over here, still want a reasonable reasonable level of income. And if you're investing in these areas, I personally argue the income is too low. You could be getting yields sub 2%, and it really doesn't pay you much in the short term and give you much of an incentive to hold that particular asset. Now let's face it, most investors need some kind of income, so these types of locations may not prove ideal investments, especially if you're buying with a mortgage, because if you're buying with a mortgage, the lender's going to, and you should also be, stress testing that particular deal. And because the yield is so low, it may fail on the stress test, certainly around the 2-year mark, perhaps even on a 5-year stress test as well, as I'm recording this video in 2025 at a base rate around 4.75%. Although perhaps from the time this video is being published, that may have dropped, because in February we are expecting a decrease to 4.5%, or at least I am. So as a result, these locations may not work for investors who want some level of income. It may not work for buy-to-let investors who are purchasing with a mortgage too. Now, if you're still struggling and unsure which locations to invest in and you need some help, please do consider booking your initial consultation call with me. The link to my coaching service where you can book that call is in the description of this video. So there we have it. Now let me summarize all this for you, and I'll look to my laptop for this. So first of all, we have the cheapest property or poor capital growth outlook in the UK, which is Hartlepool, Bishop Auckland, Peterlee, Accrington, Blackburn, Nelson and Cole. Then we're moving on to the poorer areas of Leeds, such as Hare Hills, East End Park, Belle Isle and even Bradford. Then we've got rundown coastal cities and towns, including Blackpool, Hastings, Morecambe, Barrow and Furness. Then we talked about the Welsh Valleys, and lastly we touched on very good, large, positive cities but with a poor yield. So for example, London, Luton, Watford, St Albans and Guildford. Now, if you're looking for the complete opposite areas to invest in, or at least areas that I believe will perform in the long term, well, the video that follows this video is going to answer your question, because we'll be discussing several key areas to invest in. Now, if you do have a question, please do comment below. As you know, I respond personally to all very nice and positive comments. And in fact, if you've got a location to avoid, I tell you what, comment, because that'd be great, and we'll be able to see whatever areas investors on the channel are avoiding. Now, if you're not sure which video to watch next, I'm going to let the YouTube algorithm determine which video is best for you. So hopefully you're seeing a video somewhere pop up. Click on that very video and I'll see you in that next video. All the very best with your property investing day. Goodbye.